So good afternoon, dear colleagues. We start our event. It is the 9th of September, and we are here in order to discuss a very important topic, that is culture in the context of decentralization, new districts. Let me present all of our guests first, and then we switch to discussion of the very important issues there. And we are waiting for Mr. Jim Hope, Director of USAID Mission in Ukraine and Belarus, to join us by Skype. We expect for him to join. Mr. Tkachenko, the Minister of Culture and Information Policy. Mr. Nehoda, Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories. Yulia Fediv, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund. Oleksandr, the team leader of Swiss Ukrainian and Diaspora Project Support for Decentralization. Ms. Natalia Kluchnik, Executive Director of the Association of Village and Settlement Communities in Ukraine, Amalgamated Communities in Ukraine, and also advisor for USAID Dobra program, and Ms. Pavlinska, head of Zavodska Amalgamated Community of Ternopil region. So I'm waiting for the colleagues to give me a sign about that. Jim Hope is ready to address us. He is a new leader of USAID mission in Ukraine and Belarus. Unfortunately, he is with us offline, but anyway, it is very important that he joins in order to highlight the relevance of the topic of culture in the context of decentralization. Why we're here? Actually, last year, the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center made a very important survey that highlighted a very important issue, that is culture infrastructure in the context of decentralization. I will ask you to show the presentation, and based on that, we will start the discussion. I will present several slides for each of the participants for us to see which aspects became relevant or turned out relevant based on that survey. So that survey conducted by the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center was conducted in order to explore the situation regarding culture in amalgamated communities, and the survey was held from the 1st till the 15th of March 2019 among managers or authorized individuals who are responsible for aspects of culture in amalgamated communities. The survey covered 7 regions, including 75 communities that are Dobre partners. There are 900 settlements and more than 840,000 population. So first of all, we wanted to see what is the understanding of management regarding cultural infrastructure and what they currently have, what is the status of the infrastructure and of human resources. First striking figure, well, actually this data are again based on survey of managers. So only 4.29% of funds are allocated for culture at the level of amalgamated communities as of 2018. We understand that in 2019 the situation was like that, but in 2020, unfortunately, the situation deteriorated. We remember that with the pandemic and the budget cuts were to a great extent at the expense of the culture. Then the next figure, it is how many people work in the field of culture, providing cultural services or producing cultural products. This is 0.34 for the covered communities. So my question goes to Mr. Tkachenko. And I believe that it is obvious from these 2 slides. And let me tell you that probably today we will not hear answers to all of our questions. Most likely we will have even more questions as a result. So we need to really discuss these aspects now, and I believe that we will have many more discussions to look for answers to these questions. So Oleksandr, I have this question, or rather request. Could you present the plans of the Ministry of Culture regarding the city as of now in the context of decentralization? First, you mentioned the word sequester in the context of the situation in 2020. I believe it is rather exaggeration, because if we speak about the budget of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, not the total budget for the ministry together with the Department for Sports, now the budget is a bit more than last year. And also we now have 1 billion hryvnias in the context of the COVID crisis to compensate the damages for creative economy and the sector of culture. So before we start panicking, let's look at the figures. Then, speaking about decentralization, we have several responses to that, and it doesn't mean that we know all the answers, but how can we engage into the process so that the figures that you mentioned did not look so miserable? Because even though the sequester was not that appalling or terrifying, all in all, financing of culture at the national and regional levels are really miserable. So it is lower than in Albania if you compare it with GDP per capita. So we need to somehow balance the activities at the national level and at the local level. And there are several answers to that. The institutional program for the Ukrainian Cultural Fund has been launched now at the third phase. The fund will be able to allocate 295 million hryvnias, including at the local level, to support cultural institutions. Regional strategies to develop tourism have been developed, as well as regional magnets for tourism. Second phase of the education program, Academy for Cultural Leader, has been launched. It engages actually all people who work in the field of culture. Now it covers 45 amalgamated communities. The program to unwrap the cultural potential of regions has been launched. And what's also important is development of centers for cultural services. We hope that this year we will implement several pilot projects in some of the districts. We have money for that. This is about transforming 16,000 libraries, clubs, and other cultural centers as modern state-of-the-art centers to provide cultural services, online libraries, cinema halls, etc. So we understand that without active engagement or initiative of amalgamated communities, we won't be able to achieve anything. If amalgamated communities come up with initiatives, we are happy to support them. There is a model for funding where the regional authorities finance transformation of these cultural centers, and while we, from the national budget, will cover another part of that. But what's important is to mention several aspects. That next year we need to fix and to set the percentage of funds that is allocated for culture. That is very important, and we will work on that to have that set, as well as developing PPP partnerships for regions. It may also be a way out. And all the other programs that we have planned, we plan to continue implementing them. This year we plan visits by all deputy ministers and my visits to regions, in particular to work with local communities in the context of arts schools and in the context of our program for restoration of museums, fortresses, theaters, as well as other programs planned in the framework of the presidential decree issued 2 weeks ago. Without cooperation, we won't be able to support each other. And since decentralization is going to be completed, we need to transform our activities in view of needs of local communities. Thank you. If I may, a clarification question. You mentioned allocation of funds from the budget and the percentage of allocations for culture. What are your aspirations? Do you have a vision there? We have submitted to the Ministry of Finance our perspective, because now we start discussing the budget for the next year. So after they provide us with the feedback, then it would be more adequate for me to state our expectations, maybe after that. Okay, so when asking questions to all the participants, I also ask questions to myself, not in order to answer all of them now exhaustively, but actually to go back to that. Yes, we have that vision, and let me just mention that all in all, we expect that allocations for culture will be increased by at least 50% next year. Thank you, Oleksandr, and we are going to go back to some issues and to have a joint discussion there. We want all of you to speak first, and now I would like to go to Mr. Nehoda, and let me now show another slide. The other slide presents the cultural infrastructure at the level of amalgamated communities that as of 2019 were on communities balance. It is 900 settlements, you remember, 75 communities. So it is 488 clubs, libraries 270, museums 17, music schools 22, art schools 11, and 0 cinemas actually. So this is the most distorted slide. Let me explain why. Because a lot of cultural infrastructure objects belong not to the community, but to the district or regional authorities. So the important question is, what's going to happen to these facilities when the reform is completed? Will they be passed over to the balance of the new districts, or will they be distributed to the communities? If they are subordinated to district authorities, let's speak about museums. For example, in Tulchin Rayon, well, Tulchin Rayon is going to stay, but it's going to be expanded. And so the exposition and the scientific work is going to go larger scale, or some districts disappear. So what about the museums? Will they be passed over to the balance sheet of the community? I understand that this is quite a challenging question now. However, could you explain what are going to be the authorities of the new districts in the context of the new infrastructure? No microphone. Thank you for organizing this public discussion today. Well, the topic culture in the context of decentralization, new rayons or districts. So culture and decentralization. We always say that decentralization needs to take place in a cultured way, in a balanced way, and actually, no matter where we are, we need to look cultured, highly cultured. So now we speak about the infrastructure, about the facilities that have the functions to promote culture and to pursue other objectives in the field of culture or policy, cultural policy implemented at the central level by the Ministry of Culture, and at the regional level it is implemented by executive authorities, regional administrations, councils, sub-regional level, that's district councils and district administrations and communities. So before I speak about your second slide, let me first go back to the previous one. Is it good or bad, these figures that you are showing? Well, sure, you always need to compare. When you just say 4.29%, well, it doesn't tell you much unless you see the dynamics. And you have your sample of 75 amalgamated communities that Dobra program works with, and that's good. However, if you compare, for example, the sector of culture and the facilities, cultural facilities funded from local budgets of amalgamated communities, and what we still don't have subordinated or distributed to amalgamated communities, I mean those settlements that are subordinated to district administrations. So if you compare, you will see where they create better conditions for development of culture. But this is an exercise that we need to do in the future, and we will do that together to find that out. And obviously, if before the start of the decentralization process that we are discussing, actually this is a reform of local governance and the system of territorial organization of authority. So if before that everything were perfect, including in culture, obviously the changes would not have been needed. So we can stipulate or state that the situation in many areas, in many sectors, including culture, does not make us happy today, for the exception of some role models in some regions or communities. So we now emphasize the new districts, and if districts are that active, and actually a district is an administrative-territorial unit, so we rather speak about the administrations and authorities at the district level. So there, people are now going to elect their councils and administrations. Are they the subjects that can ensure development of culture in that large territory? Well, obviously they can do something, but we believe that in the context of decentralization, it is possible to create sustainable communities. And we believe that who but the communities are in a better position to develop culture, traditions, communication. There are no other authorities that could do that better than the territorial communities. So the main focus, emphasis, and the allocation of resources will be focused to support the communities. That should be those focal points and those cultural honeycomb cells that develop, form, and develop the traditions and culture, and also they develop the key infrastructure that ensures provision of those services that will probably be provided via the cultural centers. I like that idea that was suggested by the Ministry of Culture, because recently we've been discussing centers for provision of administrative services, and now we obviously need the centers for cultural services, because even that list on your second slide, a list of various facilities available at the level of village communities, clubs, libraries, museums, etc. So every community has its own. All of that is rather dispersed. So this is the infrastructure that is not currently being used efficiently in different senses. So if we speak again about your question regarding the districts, sure, now a significant part of the infrastructure that is intended to provide services in the field of culture is now subordinated to the Rayon administrations. So that's communal property of the territorial community managed by district councils. However, this is joint communal property of territorial communities. In line with the draft law that has been submitted to the Parliament, 3651, upon completion of establishment of the system of local administrations this year, after that, most of them, those that are located in territories of communities and that provide services to the communities, the residents of the communities need to so they need to become part of the community, or it is necessary to think about how the communities can continue managing these facilities. And if we still have some facilities that cover large territories, they can further be managed at the district level. So again, the key emphasis is that most of the facilities like music schools, art schools, other facilities, well, we are sure that it is the communities that can manage them best, and that's what they're going to do, even though there are some aspects to that. And speaking about those museums, as you mentioned, within smaller districts that has now become larger, I see no problem there. People visit museums. They don't care about the administration. And the very philosophy of a district, it is rather artificial. We are used to that since the decrease from early communist times, but this is about community. This is territorial community, people who live there, who create culture, added value, and all life happens in communities. While districts, this is about executive authorities and administration. So those districts that will be set up there, they are supposed, well, by the way, in the field of culture, and I believe that the minister can comment on that. So we have the national policy, national cultural policy, and it is important for the ministry to have like representation in the territories that would make it possible to implement the policy, national policy at the local level. So this should be regional administrations with the respective departments and the management of oblast subordination theaters, large museums that provide services not only to residents of the community, but to tourists, like reserves, national or local ones. Well, that's one level. At the second level, at the district level, it is also about implementation of the national policy, control over part of those facilities that are included into the list of cultural heritage, and those that are located in communities. And then it is necessary to monitor the situation, to what extent the communities ensure implementation of implement the national policy. And then initiatives of local governments that in the framework of the national policy can implement their own initiatives. There are polyethnic communities, those that have different traditions, so they can develop what is relevant for them and that does not violate the national policy or the legislation. Just to comment on that briefly, based on the practice, limited practice that we have so far, sure, the most important levels for us, that is oblast culture administrations to preserve cultural heritage, and there we need to work closely with them. And of course, we need to work with the communities. We hope that local amalgamated communities will be active. It's not even about some official positions. Communities are active, and that is known at the oblast level. I mean, at the oblast level, it is obvious which communities are active and realize how important it is to implement cultural transformations. Thank you, Oleksandr and Vyacheslav. You have touched upon some important aspects that we will go back to a bit later. And I see that we have a lot of questions from those who are on the other side of the screen. So I discover that we have quite an extensive audience on the YouTube channel of Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. And for Mr. Hope, we're still waiting for him to join. Let's try and hear Mr. Jim Hope, USAID mission for Ukraine and Belarus, team leader.
Wonderful. Доброго dnia, team. My name is Jim Hope. I'm the new, excellent. My name is Jim Hope. I'm the new USAID Mission Director here in Ukraine. And I apologize for my technical difficulties this morning, but I'm very happy to join you, Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister, all of our representatives online from local governments, as well as the representatives from the Ukraine Culture Fund. I'm very happy to be joining you today. I arrived in Ukraine just about a month ago, so I'm very much learning about what the development challenges are, what USAID is doing about them in partnership with all of our Ukrainian friends and colleagues. Here today we have, I think, a great topic for discussion. And I thought I would start with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of its people." And that is particularly true in Ukraine, where culture and history. And that's particularly true because here in Ukraine, culture and history is the foundation. It provides richness and depth to the national experience. In this sense, culture is just as important as good governance or a strong economy or social justice. And today, sorry, we're having some audio issues again. Today, we're talking about the importance of maintaining and developing culture and cultural services in the context of decentralization. We'll consider the changes that this reform has brought, both nationally and locally. And certainly one thing I have learned in my short time here is that decentralization is one of the country's most important and critical reform initiatives, and a success for Ukraine. And USAID is very proud and happy to have been your partners in carrying out those reforms and to continue to carry out those reforms. So delegating real authorities and resources to the local level makes governance more responsive and efficient in ways that people can see, citizens can see and feel for themselves. It provides opportunities to resolve local problems more quickly and empowers local communities and community members to have more of a voice in their future, in their local governance. There's still a lot of work to do. Newly consolidated communities still face challenges in taking on these new roles and responsibilities, and the desire to provide better quality services to their residents. USAID's Dobre activity is working in 75 consolidated communities, providing assistance to make this transition from centralized to localized leadership successful, and to be done in a way that improves the lives of residents. This includes services around culture, of course, and many of our partner communities identify effective cultural services as a driver of strong social cohesion, citizen engagement, and economic activity. For example, people meet and interact more often before, during, and after cultural events. These bring citizens together with local leaders and other community representatives. So for example, our support through USAID Dobre project is helping communities develop strategic plans around priority cultural services, often using existing or renewed cultural infrastructure. For example, young people are using libraries as co-working spaces where they have access to technology and can learn new skills. In other communities, we're helping support cultural institutions such as a museum in Terabovlyanska that will support the history of the community, host a variety of master classes in traditional arts, and attract tourism. So as decentralization reform continues, new challenges are appearing. What's the best way to transfer Rayon cultural infrastructure to the local level? How can we ensure that local governments have enough budget resources to meet local cultural needs? USAID is ready to assist with this dialogue between communities and national stakeholders. We're ready to contribute expertise, state-of-the-art methodologies to help with planning and developing cultural services. We're ready to continue to work with the Ministry of Culture and other government institutions on the lessons learned that we've experienced during engagements with communities on how to best manage existing resources and how to mobilize residents around developing the cultural sphere. USAID also has extensive experience in asset management at the local level, so we're ready to continue to work with the Ministry of Communities and Territorial Development in establishing procedures for transferring assets from the Rayon to the local level, including cultural infrastructure. Our common goal is for communities to become self-reliant and capable of enriching and transforming existing cultural assets. It's a big challenge, but it's one that we can do together in our strong partnership. And I just want to express my sincere appreciation to the Minister of Culture and to the Deputy Minister of Communities and Territorial Development for their strong commitment to sustaining cultural development as part of the decentralization reform process. I look forward to working with you going forward, as does the whole USAID team. And I would finally just like to express appreciation and respect to all of the Oblast, Rayon, and other community representatives who've joined us today for the tremendous effort that you are all doing for local governance in Ukraine. Thank you all very much for the chance to join you. I apologize for my technical challenges, and дуже дякую.
Thank you. Thank you to the USAID mission for comprehensive support in decentralization-related aspects, culture-related aspects. And the presentation, actually, that I'm using today, it was developed due to support of USAID via DOBRE project. And today we can speak in more detail. We can use some figures, ground on the figures. There are a lot of questions to that, but we still have that. And thank you, Viacheslav, that you emphasize that we need to still continue further exploration to understand the issues and challenges at the local level. Thank you, Mr. Hope. Thank you for having joined us, and thanks for activities of USAID in Belarus and Ukraine. And we continue our discussion. Now we switch to Yulia. And let's speak about this. Let's speak about alternative sources of funding for culture at the local level. Because frankly speaking, we travel a lot throughout Ukraine. We talk to communities, we talk to facilities, cultural facilities, and they often tell us nobody is doing anything. When we say who is not doing what, they always refer to the national level. They say that they need to do something at the national level, while here we kind of observe. So today, Viacheslav mentioned a very important element for any kind of cooperation, and that is a proactive approach from bottom up. And this initiative, or proactivity at the local level, unfortunately is not always what we observe. And I always raise this important question: what are you lacking? They say we lack money. Oh, okay, money. But what do you need your money for? For what, for whom, and who's going to implement the initiatives? So, in the recent several years, we've been having this institution in Ukraine that has stimulated an important transformation in the context of culture. This is the Ukrainian Cultural Fund that promotes transformations in this sector. And let me now show the slide to you. We asked cultural managers if they amalgamated communities participated in grant activities. 70% said no, never. So the Ukrainian Cultural Fund keeps speaking about low level of proactivity or interest at the local level. So Yulia, could you stipulate the position and the capacity of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund, maybe your plans for the future? And also, let me remind you that the most important thing is to activate proactive approaches from bottom up. So I would like to remind you that the Ukrainian Cultural Fund is a state national institution extending grants for culture, tourism, creative industries. We've been existing for 3 years now. If you see the dynamics since 2018, the fund has already held 3 years of extending grant support, and we have received about 5,000 applications, and we have supported more than 1,000 projects. The first year, 2018, there about 70% of applications were from Kyiv Oblast. Only 30% came from other regions. In 2019, the situation was better. There it was 50 to 50 from Kyiv and from other regions, and in 2020 we see positive dynamics for the regions. And that is something that we are happy about. And of course, there is different level of proactivity of various oblasts and communities. Our top 3 are Lviv, Kharkiv and Rivne oblasts so far, and the respective territorial communities of those 3 oblasts. But we are working so that the dynamics were positive for all regions in Ukraine. But the positive thing is that all the regions are represented. There are no regions that would be absent, that would not apply for our programs. All in all, we have 13 programs as of now, and representatives of territorial communities can join all the 13 of them. We also focus on work with the regions within a separate program, Culture Tourism Regions. This is a program that we are implementing together with USAID. And first year, we only focused on Zakarpattia and Odessa Oblast, but next year we are planning to cover the entire territory of Ukraine, and there is an emphasis on projects from territorial communities. We have the program Cultural Capital of Ukraine. We've signed memoranda with the associations to launch the competition for the small cultural capital that communities can apply for, and the large cultural community for cities more than 100,000 people. So in the context of these initiatives, we want to enhance engagement of regions in this way. As Leonid mentioned, we need to organize training. Starting from October, the fund launches trainings online and offline. So any territorial community that would be interested in holding an individual training for institutions in its territories can address us, send us a letter, and we can organize a training session. These are 3-day trainings. They're developed in collaboration with the NGO Insha Osvita. This is about grant management and managing state funds, because we see that project management trainings are rather challenging, so we developed our own training, how to use state grants. And this training can be organized online, and so then people can receive the certificates and go back to those online videos on the website of the fund. Together with the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, we are working in order to expand our staff and to have 5 regional offices next year, because we do need regional representation or local representation, because we keep traveling. Before COVID pandemic, we used to travel a lot. We organized information days or sessions, but that's not enough. You need day-to-day consultations. You need to meet various sectors to actualize and to speak more about the Ukrainian Cultural Fund. So hopefully next year we will have 5 regional representative offices in the East, West, South, North, and the center. Then this year, in the framework of analytics of culture, we supported the research of the Strategic Institute of Lviv to develop methodological guidelines for local communities to set up cultural funds.
Українського культурного фонду в контексті децентралізації дуже важливо створення регіональних фондів культури і чітке розподілення, що фінансує державний фонд, а що фінансують регіональні фонди, а віддалі також і місцеві фонди. Відповідно, така ініціатива є з міста Львова, і вони пропонують наступну формулу, коли Український культурний фонд дає 10-15 мільйонів гривень на певний регіон і близько від 10 до 15
10 to 5 million are allocated by local communities to invest into culture. We also hope that we will develop cooperation with the state budget, and we hope that there will be the amalgamation of soft and hard projects, because we do not finance hard projects like construction. That's why 70% do not submit their applications to the fund, and that, based on our survey, the utmost need is about infrastructure. So if your roof is leaking, you're not going to think about soft issues. So we're thinking about how to combine that. If we speak about development of estimates and preparation for the construction, that can be funded from the budget, while the fund can allocate funds to develop the content of that, like regional museums, local festivals, etc. So in that context, we need to revise the significance of culture at the local level, and the fund is going to join there. So we hope that this collaboration will be efficient. So it would be good if we could plan this kind of pilot projects a year ahead, at least the regions where we invest most of the funds, because we understand that we won't have enough funds for the 24 regions at once. So it's important to develop a joint approach to cover step by step the entire territory of Ukraine, in order that later we had those magnets, as we say now, that would be role models for other regions. And here the principle of multiplication works well. We know about Dobre, ULEAD, about GIZ initiatives, a lot of initiatives that are already investing into communities, into other areas. There are partner cities abroad, so there are a lot of mechanisms, but now we need to train local authorities to use those mechanisms. And our task, the task of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund, is to show this map for opportunities for funding. Local businesses also start investing into culture, so it's not only about national funding, but also about local businesses that need to become a stronghold and to invest. I would like to add regarding capital expenditures. We do hear a lot about capital expenditures, and that's why we launched this program of large restoration for the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to cover not only those facilities that are on the balance sheet of the ministry, but above all those that are subordinated to oblast councils or communities. So we have already several times announced that, and we invited local communities and oblast administrations to join, for them to send the applications and description of the projects to join the program. Now we are preparing the resolution of the cabinet to set up an expert group, a team to select those projects, and of course we cannot do without collaborating with local communities. Only with that collaboration we will be able to transform those facilities into those that will be preserved and that will attract people, and they will gain new significance. So speaking about financing, Well, speaking about our Ministry of Regional Development, well, there is the State or Budget Program that is a state fund for regional development. And by the way, even though there is no limit or ceiling set, well, they used the period when we had to cover at least 10% of sports infrastructure facilities, etc. So now they are lifted. However, if there is a facility for sports or culture, it's not yet about sports or culture. I mean, okay, they can organize a lot of playgrounds or sports grounds, and there are a lot of cultural objects, but many of them do not work, they are not operational. So, as mentioned, I believe Yulia mentioned that it is important to bring that together. If there is no initiative, no facility will be of use. I mean, all of that needs to be done in such a way where it becomes vibrant. And speaking about another initiative, a competition announced by the ministry. So now you can apply for soft projects, and there is a significant funding allocated for that. This is a competition for sectoral support. These are funds of EU. We have already had one phase of that project. Now these projects are being implemented. More than 70 projects were winners of that competition, and now we once again announce that competition till the 20th of October. You can submit your projects. You can see the information on the website of the Ministry of Regional Development, and there you can include not infrastructural projects from the point of view of construction or whatever, but rather network or sustainable development related projects or regional programs that activate the field of development of cultural heritage or tourism or whatever. So there are these opportunities now, and I agree that unfortunately not everyone makes use of these opportunities. So their communities need support. Even the administrations, management of national reserves or theaters, they need support there because they have not had the experience of submitting projects to implement some initiatives. We need to do that, and I believe that now the opportunities are available. You just need to use them, and in the future, together with the Ministry of Culture, we need to think about how to activate that work. After elections starting in November or December, where the budget is approved for the next year, we need to not just indicate some figure. Okay, you have that figure in the budget, like 10% or 5% for culture, but what's next? What is going to appear out of that? We often have this psychology that you need to spend money till the end of the year. Why? Well, you need to spend it just. But we need to avoid that. We need to develop programs and projects that will be as multipliers, that will have multiplication effect. Thank you, Vyacheslav. Thank you, Oleksandr, for your comments. They are very important. And today's event is broadcasted on Facebook pages of Dobra, Decentralization, Ukrainian Media Center, Despra, and Ukrainian Crisis Media Center YouTube channel. Thank you all who we're grateful to our audience and all of your comments. Well, we will try to voice them, but those that we will not be able to discuss today will form the basis for further discussions in order to continue discussing this topic. Now I would like to switch to discussion of an important aspect that you have mentioned. I mean that at the local level, there are very limited opportunities to develop those grant applications or even deciding on the topics for museums, exhibition spaces, or transformation of current educational facilities. This is an important slide. This is which topics are most interesting for culture managers, and above all, this is about writing grant applications. Then international experience, 36%, communication, unfortunately, only 10% of them are interested in that, and only 12% say that all the specialized topics are important. Another important slide You don't see it well, but you can see a lot of important information there. 53% of cultural managers have not had any training in the process of decentralization. That's a challenge for us all, and 97% are ready to be trained and to delegate their subordinates to be trained. Now I switch to Oksana Garnets. She is manager of Ukrainian Swiss project DASPRA. That's a logical question. I understand you can guess it now. So does your organization, as well as other organizations engaged in decentralization, focus a lot on education, sharing best practices, international practices? But could you remind our audience your plans for this and next years in the context of what we've mentioned so far? Thank you, and thanks for your invitation, and thank you for that making the topic of culture so relevant, because I believe that culture traditionally has been funded and perceived in not as a priority, so to put it. And so we can see what it results in. So Mr. Hope mentioned a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, and I would like to mention a quotation from Angela Merkel. It is this morning that I read that Ms. Merkel mentioned the 3 key priorities for development of a state. They include ensuring good education, access to good education to all, support for businesses as the foundation basis for the country's development, and support of artists and people associated with culture and arts as those who ensure development of spiritual development of the country. And I believe this is what we need to ground on, this is where we need to start. All of us need to keep in mind that if culture fails, the state fails too. Because these cultural centers in some individual communities, they preserve the nation's cultural code, which then is transformed as the general national Ukrainian cultural code. We first worked with very different topics in the framework of our project, which had very limited links with culture. It was like water supply for cultural facilities, maybe. However, starting from some 6 or 7 years ago, we started realizing that the most important thing is to develop the critical mass of people in the communities that are now amalgamated, people who would understand how to proceed, where to go, and which prospective objectives to set. One of those objectives is to develop an identity of every community, because development of amalgamated communities resulted in that people from several communities come together and they feel probably that they've lost something. Like previously we were this village or district or council, but now we're different. So development of this common identity that would, as Mr. Hope said, that there is this concept of social cohesion. This is about social unity, actually, about understanding joint tasks, etc. So all of that is developed due to cultural phenomena. So what is ensured via cultural events, cultural facilities, if they operate adequately, that is unique. That cannot be substituted with anything else. So we started working on training within our programs, development of communities' identity, including by using cultural instruments of culture. Now speaking about more practical things. Within our project, we have two large significant tools for training or capacity building for communities and individuals living in those communities. There's a School of Local Governance and our training platform that operates has been working for 6 years, and the school has been there for 6 years too. In the framework of that school, we have a separate training course on development of local identity, as we put it. And I would like to emphasize that for the first time in the context of decentralization, it was Anatoly Fedorovich Tkachenko who started speaking about local identity. So we followed that. Local identity, it is something that is developed via cultural phenomena. So preserving, restoring culture, all of that is very important. And it is possible to do that only by implementing projects. Yulia from the Cultural Fund mentioned cultural projects and that it's necessary to bring together various forms of funding. I believe that this is one of the most important aspects, because now only a small number of amalgamated communities out of those that we have contacts with have the understanding of pooling various sources of funding. Secondly, there is a huge problem because even though now there are a lot of donor organizations, a lot of funds that deal with training, however, training for project-based thinking, I mean, where you have an idea, that's just the start of that. Then you need to present this idea in such a way that it is funded, and you need to have an understanding who's going to implement that. That's true. So, on our online platform, this year we are going to hold our 7th training course on project management that is focused on this path from an idea to the project. Those people who will attend the course, they will be trained in developing an idea and developing a project concept. And by the way, there are very interesting, quite unexpected effects of that. When we attended Belarus, a community in Luhansk Oblast, a representative of the Department of Economics attended the course, this training course, then she went back home, and due to that she started acting as an engine, they developed and they won 29 projects per just one, though large community. Some of the projects were related to culture. But let me also mention that we keep speaking about initiatives. Initiative, that's important. However, initiatives need to be grounded on systemic approach, because you can not rely on enthusiasm only. Sure, there should be proactive people. However, there should also be a system that provides for implementation of this initiative, providing managerial and financial tools. So, for the future, in the framework of our School for Local Self-Governance, we plan to work to introduce a short training course on development of cultural aspects of amalgamated communities. And we believe that that will produce good results, because for local governance school, we invite not just some individuals from communities, we invite managers, leaders of the communities. So that's a guarantee of that there is a certain group of people who are like-minded, at least to some extent, and they are going to move this process on. In the same way, we are going to think about a similar training course based on our platform, which is very popular. Annually, the project management training course is attended by about 1,000 people. Well, not all of them graduate completed. However, eventually you have those certified experts. And I believe that establishing this kind of instruments covering various training aspects should also be the thing that will keep the situation moving. Because all of those facilities that you mentioned, all those buildings, they need to be filled in with people who understand how to manage that, how to operate that, who understand that they need to go to various funds, donors, etc., to support certain projects. That's normal. That's what is done globally. And also, the minister mentioned creative economy. Unfortunately, he has left. But let me mention that we don't have any creative economy. We don't have even any hope for creative economy. And that's a pity, because it is another tool that makes it possible to develop the field of culture. But in any case, we can aspire to that. We need to develop that, to create that. Because our children, for example, they go to Netherlands to be trained there, and there they are trained in the framework of creative economy, and then they achieve success in that field there. So why cannot we develop this? Just to add to that, those who go there to study there, they stay there and they implement their capacities there, unfortunately. And here we go back to the second slide of my presentation, less than 1% of people who deal with culture. So you mentioned an important topic that everybody has mentioned already. This is local identity. And this is something that a lot of people are discussing now, though not many activities are being implemented there, and it is very relevant. Local identity, it is a topic associated with the field of culture. At the local level, this is something that needs to be implemented at a professional level. Identity, that's a very challenging topic. It doesn't like populism, non-professional approach. It is vulnerable or sensitive to manipulation. So huge efforts are needed to create special conditions to work with that topic. Now I would like to pass the floor to Natalia Kluchnik, Executive Director of the Association of Village Settlement and Amalgamated Communities of Ukraine and advisor for USAID DOBRE. Let me remind you that DOBRE program helps communities to improve services, and the priority for selecting the services is the opinion of the community. An example of a component of the program is a Zavodska community. We will go back to that experience a bit later, but now the floor goes to Natalia Kluchnik, who has something to say there, to comment on what we have heard today. I have a lot of questions to the statements made today, so I'm very much interested in hearing your opinion about cultural infrastructure in the context of decentralization, new districts. I do have a lot of things to share with you, but let me try and be concise, because otherwise that would be too long. Thank you very much for this invitation for the roundtable. I'm grateful to all the speakers here, because in this or that way we're engaged in implementing those tasks that we're discussing today. 3 years ago we went to the Ministry of Culture and we said that we have a problem about cultural facilities, and our amalgamated communities and those communities that were not yet amalgamated, they asked us for support. The ministry responded and we started sorting out the problems. Dobre program works with 75 amalgamated communities, and they suggested a tool to improve the services. In particular, the communities could opt for cultural services and develop this area, improving services for partner communities for Dobre program. So eventually, we could see that there is a huge list of problems that communities encounter, and we have not even mentioned some of them. The issue is that they have invalid infrastructure. That's obvious, that because it has become obsolete. There are cultural facilities that are just dying, and it's very depressing. Lack of human resources, lack of financial resources, we've mentioned that. But how could we switch from infrastructure to the content of that? Only by strategic thinking, only by understanding what we have now and where we want to be after some time. Dobre program developed this instrument, and soon you will see a manual or guidelines for those who would like to use this tool to improve their services, not only in the field of culture, but all services. Actually, that is a comprehensive tool, and specific features for development of strategic plans to improve services in the field of culture has some specific aspects, and there it is based on experience of those communities where they have developed this plan. This instrument was very important for us because we started disseminating it to other communities. We are grateful to the Ukrainian Cultural Fund for supporting this initiative to multiply the experience, and we could try if this instrument applies only to partner communities, how it applies to other regions. So there was a project where we had where we selected 30 communities, and we brought together those people who represent not only executive communities or the field of culture, but also intersectoral education activists in the territory. There were also councillors, business representatives of businesses, and this working group that joined the process was able within a very short period of time to diagnose the situation, state of affairs. So they actually discovered a lot in the context of that diagnostics, and they realized that they need to somehow maintain that infrastructure from their budgets. But after this second phase, where there was a survey of citizens where we tried to discover which services would be needed by the community, that gave answers to a lot of questions. So only this kind of surveys, diagnostics, what citizens need, how they want to identify themselves locally, that is an important component of that job. And based on that, you develop strategic objectives, goals, and then you can see whether you need just one center or several there. Do you need to build a road to some facility that will be attractive for tourists, or maybe not, because it is not that much appealing? Maybe you lack communication strategy to raise what you already have to a higher level to make it really a sparkle, that magnet, as we mentioned. So that can not only be grounded on ideas. All of that needs to be presented in detail with a lot of arguments, figures, based on the number of citizens, demographics, migration of population, whether the community is being urbanized or maybe people go abroad to earn money. All of that needs to be taken into account, and only after that you decide whether you need one center or several or multi-center that will be used. So only then you decide on your tools. The project was implemented together with the Ukrainian Center for Cultural Research. That was very much of help because those were professional advisors, and we also developed and accumulated best practices in Ukraine. They are now available, you can see that. So if you just look at the results, out of 30 communities, 18 submitted plans to improve the services. Not all of them reached the final point, and Oksana is that's true that not everybody is going to complete. However, each of them prepared one project, which could be the core entry point or magnet for their territory. They were looking for that identity, and they did find it when we organized a summary conference. We invited businesses, donors, etc. Many of those projects that were developed in the course of that project that was supported by you, many of them have been implemented, and that's important. Of course, we have not done everything as we wish to, and not everything works out as we wish it to, because you need tailor-made approach. But the main thing is the algorithm, where you start. You start with diagnostics of territories and development of strategic approaches and a model that would be efficient not only in the financial sense, but that will keep the heritage, that will promote the territory and engage people. And without human capital, without engaging people, it would not be possible. Last year, when we implemented a project in Ivano-Frankivsk region, there we engaged a lot of local entrepreneurs. More than 55 business persons participated. When we first met them, they didn't believe that. They said, how come this is a large field where you are going to organize a festival, but then that village having 3,000 of residents was visited by 17,000 of tourists. Well, that was a significant result. And then those business persons came and they said, we are ready to build the road. We are ready to allocate 10 million to organize, to build the road. So I believe that this is an example of activation of not only cultural specialists and those who invest a lot of themselves. Activists, executive committees, all of them came together. However, when it becomes obvious, when it attracts attention, there everybody is ready to contribute. So all of our efforts that we've made so far need to be multiplied. We need to come together and work together. Thank you. Actually, this is why we are here today, to show the synergy for future work. Unfortunately, not always we have kept that in mind. Not always we have had the opportunity to come together and to prove that two ministries, they fund various donor organizations. Hopefully they will continue working in the same direction, even though some may think that culture, it is something that applies only to the Ministry of Culture. Now we have another Skype participant. It is Lyudmila Pavlinska, head of Zavodska Amalgamated Community, Ternopil Oblast. She will share positive experience of working with positive infrastructure objects, where they grant not only on the facility and the object, but also the senses and the content of that. The floor is yours. Hello. I welcome you all, and it's my great pleasure to be with you today and to discuss this very important topic for us as leaders of communities. So now I would like to explain that we were among the pioneers that chose that challenging path approach, and we've done a lot of things that you've discussed already in the studio. So when we started decentralization, we faced quite a lot of challenges. One of them was culture, because houses of culture, they were huge, and actually there was no sense in developing that. So we decided that we would somehow fill the cultural infrastructure with senses. Then we had the School for Aesthetic Education. We inherited it from the district. Sorry, that was a School of Arts previously. So we decided that we bring together Houses of Culture and School of Arts and to organize the School for Aesthetic Education Center for Folk Arts. And this is what I'm going to speak about today, because we already see some tangible results. So when we started working with Dobre program, one of priorities to improve the services was to focus on culture. It was quite a challenging thing. It was a long process, long negotiations, significant efforts, a lot of funds. We invested a lot into that, and now let's watch this short video before and after. And after that, I'll tell you more to better explain what we've done. Yes, let's do that. The most important challenge in the community. This is something that inspired us to submit a project. Discussion with the working group and experts. Implementation. Dreams come true. Dreams coming true. Now we have the new school. Together we are strong. Thank you for that video. And could you now explain the project in a bit more detail? You implemented it recently, and we would like to also hear about your plans for the future. What kind of support would you like to have? Or maybe you will say that you manage on your own. Well, of course, we are a community that never despairs, that tries to look for ways out, for projects to engage, and we succeed. You could see that School of Aesthetic Education before we organized the repair. You could see the process. The kids actually had to attend this school in very terrible conditions, so we believe that it would be our priority. I believe that many of you can see why culture was our priority to improve the services. So, due to Dobre program, we managed to engage 941,000 hryvnias, and we allocated 1.2 million from local budget to implement the project, because we had to organize the heating, to repair the roof, to actually do capital refurbishment, because for 30 years, no reconstruction or repair was made there. So you could see the poor state of the premises. However, it is not about the repair. It is about that we have very talented kids. They win competitions, international competitions and national ones. They become gold winners. So it's a pity to waste the talents, because I believe that culture needs to be the basis, because it is everything that we speak about, that our hearts speak about. That's what inside us. And where you have happy people and culture is something that inspires, then the country will be happy and will develop. We also participated in projects beyond Dobre project program, and we also won a project that was focused on working in the situation of pandemic. This is House of Europe. And then we shared the experience of training the kids. We described this project. We engaged the tools. We received the beamer, other hardware that we need to develop the school and to organize online training. I mean, this way we engaged 78 hryvnias more to implement that project. All in all, we also have an NGO from idea to success. We also won a project, and there we had 189,000 hryvnias. We organized a room or premises for girls where adolescent girls can come to discuss various topics. We engaged experts, we organized conferences, and that was very interesting and efficient. And actually, it is something that is going to be sustainable. All in all, we allocate 22% of revenues to the community budget for culture. This is significant because we still have a lot of everyday routine issues, but we don't give up. We keep working in that direction. Today, we would like to address the authorities to be heard so that together we could resolve some problems that arise, the challenges that we face, so that they could help us to jointly implement projects, develop culture, develop the material resources. Because, again, this is about musical instruments that we need. Then maybe the salary of trainers of the centers could be funded with subventions from the local budget. Maybe then it would release it from the budget. So all in all, for us, it is 2 million hryvnia. So then we could use this money for development to develop the material base, or the other way around, we could buy new instruments to organize new training courses so that we could increase the number of kids who would like to be trained. Because some do wish to attend, but unfortunately we cannot expand with the capacity of the local budget. We have amalgamated community. Next year, 4 more settlements are going to join us, and their kids also want to study at the School of Aesthetic Education. So it would be really good for us if we could have some support from the state, from the ministry, so that we could further develop our culture. All in all, we do everything that we can do without waiting for instructions from the top. We try to modernize and implement initiatives, implement interesting initiatives, and we succeed. Thank you, Lyudmila. This is very interesting experience. And most importantly, you have the vision why that's needed, not only verbally, but actually it is about practical approaches. Now I would like to ask a couple of questions that we received from those who watch us online. One of these questions goes to Mr. Nehoda. Actually, this is to a great extent the application of what we have discussed already. However, it proves that it is relevant. So what will be the authorities related to culture at the district level and at the level of local governance? Will the respective administrative structures will be created at the level of rayons, districts, or is it about passing over the facilities to the balance sheet of other levels? We received this question from the audience. We won't be able to cover all of those questions, but we will try to at least ask some of them to our guests. Okay, that's an interesting question. I see that the topic of the discussion and all the questions somehow relate to the new districts. But let me once again emphasize that culture is created at the level of communities, and actually development, etc., needs to happen at the level of communities, and that is the idea of the decentralization reform, that we step back from that inefficient system that still exists after local governments are created at the grassroots level instead of 11.2 thousand small communities as we had as of 2014. We are going to have 1,470 large amalgamated communities with their budgets, with their authorities, and the aspect of culture will be by 90% covered and developed by amalgamated communities. Let me now speak about districts. So we do still have about 6,000 village, settlement, and municipal communities, that is without amalgamated communities, without oblast significant cities. So these are the ones that are managed by districts. And there are facilities and the funding system. And till the end of the year, they will be funded via Rayon budgets, and they will be managed at that level. However, we've heard the examples. If we had the examples or sociological survey data that would prove that Rayon level is efficient, then we would consider the option of leaving those facilities at the Rayon level for Rayons to continue dealing with culture. However, I do not hear about any complaints about that amalgamated communities develop culture worse than districts. So again, going back to your question, the first step under the draft law is going to be determining the list of those objects or facilities that are going to be passed over to the community. There we need sure consent of the community, so when the communities make that decision that certain facilities from the list are taken on balance sheet, mostly it is about village houses of culture, which mostly unfortunately fail to perform the functions as expected by the Ministry of Culture. So unfortunately, in most cases, they have been transformed into some facilities where they may show some movies, but now there are bars, some sell beer. I don't know if that happens culturally or not, but you know, there should be the resolution of Rayon Council and by the community under that law, using the methodology as it will be determined by the cabinet. Now speaking about the authority at the Rayon level. I mentioned that the management system is such that we have the administrative vertical, the national culture policy needs to be implemented by all, of course, but the engine of that needs to be the Ministry of Culture. And as mentioned by the Minister, Mr. Tkachenko, they are interested in efficient operation of the respective oblast facilities, but at the Rayon level, there will obviously also be the respective departments, and we will still have the facilities, those that cover not just one or several communities, but larger territories. And there we will need to decide how they will be funded and how they will be managed. We have another mechanism. We should keep in mind that according to the Constitution and to the legislation, these facilities are about joint community of territorial, joint property of territorial communities. That's not the property of the state or whatever. This is property of the communities. So communities have the priority right to decide how they are going to continue using those facilities. And in the framework of legislation on cooperation of territorial communities, they will be in the position to decide how they are going to manage that, how they are going to fund those facilities, whether they are going to pass it over to another level, or whether they are going to jointly manage that, or maybe together with local administration, local authorities, they will decide to delegate these authorities to the district level, and from the district level the respective authorities will manage this set of facilities. But then, of course, they need to also engage in funding for that. I mean, engaging in funding, because today, if there are communities that are not amalgamated and that are not oblast significant cities, their taxes stay at the district level, in line with the concept and the concept of the reform. All the taxes will stay with the community, so there will be no financial resources at the Rayon level. So authority needs to be accompanied by financial resources. So of course it is the communities that will mostly be responsible for maintaining them. However, for every oblast or rayon, I would not come up with some recommendations. After the law 3651 is adopted, now it has been submitted to the parliament, expecting for the first reading. After it is adopted, then based on recommendations by the government in line with together with oblast administrations and the new communities, then it will be possible to decide, I believe, after elections, after the officials come to their offices. But in any way, no facility, not a single facility, not only in the field of culture, but also education, healthcare, which is much more challenging. So none of the facilities needs to be left unattended. Then I have a clarification question. Do I get you right that any community in the territory of which there are some there is some cultural infrastructure, they can suggest it to the district, that the district passes over the infrastructure to their balance sheet, and they will have the priority there? Well, I mentioned that there are those facilities that belong to districts that mostly provide services for residents of that community. Then why should it stay at the Rayon level if the community could manage that? So then, sure, they will have the priority. But there are more complicated situations and infrastructures that cover interests of many communities. For example, if we take a district hospital, it covers not just one community, it covers a larger territory. So there it is more complicated. So in different regions, you have different set of such objects. Most typically, these are clubs, music schools, art schools, libraries, maybe a certain number of museums. So the decision will be made on the ad hoc basis for each of the situations. So there will be no imperative decision. I mean, it will be necessary to consider, to analyze everything, the tax revenues, etc. So do I get it right that so far you don't have a single formula how it's going to happen, so it's going to be resolved individually? Well, the formula, and there's not where a deputy minister or a minister comes up with a formula. I may have a formula, I may have an idea about how I would have done that, but you need to do that in line with the legislation. So only after the law is adopted and it is accompanied by the resolution on establishing and liquidating rayons. So it covers actually all the aspects that you are speaking about. So all of that was supposed to be voted and adopted simultaneously. So far, they have not yet included this draft law into the parliamentary agenda. Hopefully, they will hear it next week. And then when we have the law, we will just work according with the law. And now I just mentioned the draft law as suggested by the government, and there all of these provisions are included. Okay, as I mentioned from the very beginning, after today's event, we will have even more questions than answers, and that's okay. The main thing is to articulate, to raise topics, to raise discussions. I believe that problems start being resolved after they are voiced. Another a question from our audience to Yulia Fediv, and it's a very logical question. Do you believe it reasonable that the fund works in more detail on decentralization in culture? In particular, it is about raising leadership potential for organizers of culture at the level of amalgamated communities, providing cultural services in various communities, looking for innovatory tools to integrate the cultural space of regions. Thank you for that question. For the priorities of the program analytics in culture, well, they include the opportunity to apply for that program and to conduct the respective survey research, and it will be funded by the state budget via the Ukrainian Cultural Fund, and then the fund as a grant will extend the grants and will manage these projects. So in October we will publish the call for proposal, and so it will be possible to organize this kind of research. Speaking about working with regions, I mentioned that we plan regional representative offices, and sure, there we will focus a lot on decentralization of culture, and we will implement methodological guidelines that have been developed in Lviv to develop financing and financial mechanisms at the grassroots level. So we already are implementing the training activities, so you just follow our website and become and participate in trainings of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund for grant management. So all of that is now available. We will just organize communication at local level to. So thank you, Yulia, and we are lagging behind the agenda now, so we have to wrap up now. Thanks to all the participants. Let me remind you that we had broadcast on Dobre, Decentralization, Despre, Ukrainian Crisis Media Center Facebook pages, and on Ukrainian Crisis Media Center YouTube. We will try to forward all the questions from the audience to the specialized departments. And let me also mention that I believe we will continue meeting to discuss culture in the context of decentralization, in the context of new rayons and oblasts through the prism of communities above all. So thank you for your participation. Thanks to those who joined us online, and Ukrainian Crisis Media Center will continue.